hello, for those who haven't had a chance to say hi to me yet, I'm Annabelle Wright, Head of Projects at the Women's Prize Trust, and hopefully all of you are familiar with me as I'm the one who has been emailing you a lot in the lead up to this. And we are... They've got water, Claire. We've done it outside. Thank you so much. We are very excited to be talking now about pitching and presentation. So I have some of the very best publicists and marketeers in the business sat in front of me, or sat in front of you, rather. So I'm going to start on the far left is Sarah Arratoon, who is Director of Creative and Marketing at John Murray Group. In the middle, we've got Jo Thomas, who's Deputy Publicity Director and Commissioning Editor at Headline. And to my left just here is Meg Brown, who's Publicity Director at Octopus. Katia kind of touched on this a bit in the previous panel, but I thought it would be really helpful to start by talking about what the role of a publicist and a marketeer is, and kind of the difference between the two and how closely you work together as departments. So Meg, do you want to start?
Yeah, so can everyone hear? Yeah, I need to hold it closer. The kind of very simple explanation that I'm sure lots of you have heard about the kind of difference between publicity and marketing is publicity is your very kind of traditional free stuff. So any promo that you're not paying for, which is normally press, is normally events, and kind of anything that falls under that bracket. And then marketing would be more what you pay for, but also the more creative stuff, I suppose. So anything to do with social media, anything to do with creating really amazing visuals, anything to do with partnerships, brand collabs, things like that. So that's a very kind of simple answer. I don't know if there's any more.
I think that's a very good answer.
Thanks.
I was just also going to add, I think in meetings internally, the marketing team are very much the voice of the consumer because we're very often the front line to readers. So I would say we very much talk as if we're the reader or from the perspective of the reader in any meetings we're in as our kind of first port of call.
Yeah, I'd say similar. I think what I think about PR now is you're sort of getting other people to say what you want them to say, whereas marketing is you're sort of saying it direct to people, whether that's on social media, whether that's an advert. In PR, you're sort of convincing a journalist or a reviewer or a bookseller to talk about your book in the way you want them to talk about it. So it's kind of two halves of the same coin. One's just direct and one is we're kind of working with other people instead.
And in terms of kind of how closely you work together as departments, I know this works differently at different publishers, and even within Hachette, I'm sure sometimes the teams work differently. But how does that sit in each of your teams, and how do you approach that when you're thinking about a bigger campaign that covers publicity and marketing?
Yeah, I mean, at Octopus, we work really closely. So even in terms of sort of my own career, I've actually, until recently, always had marketing in my title as well. So we're completely joined up when it comes to working on a campaign basis. And the reason for that is because they're so, and I think even more so now, so intertwined. So what I might be doing over here on a campaign in terms of, you know, setting up an interview on Radio 4 or a piece of print coverage, needs to be supported by the marketing person on a campaign because we want to make sure those ads are running at the right time. We want to make sure Amazon is looking really good. We want to make sure the booksellers know all about that coverage that's coming. Sales are the kind of in-between group, I suppose, within that, you know, they're constantly communicating that with all the retailers as well. So incredibly closely. And also Octopus is quite a small M&P department, so there just is a lot of overlap between the two. And actually something that is different for every division and every publishing house, but for us at least, we have a publicist and a marketer on every single campaign. So whilst a campaign may be more weighted to publicity in some instances or more weighted to marketing in others, and oftentimes with fiction it is more marketing weighted, you've got the two and they're working in tandem. I don't know if that's similar.
Tag team all the time. Yeah, we support each other throughout. It's a completely collaborative process. I don't think we can really produce a really great campaign for authors without collaborating together all the time. So
great. And in terms of the kind of right at the start of the process, when you are brought into it, we talked briefly in the earlier panel about acquisitions and how that process works. What are you as a publicist or marketeer looking for in a book when it comes in at that stage, and kind of how involved are you in that process? How do you communicate that to the editor who's ultimately going to be the one who gets to pitch it?
I think Firstly, we read it as readers. So does this excite us in some way? Can we kind of see the potential here? Can we understand who the audience might be, but also where it sits in the market amongst other things that are already out there? And also, I think we look at what's the really exciting hook about it. I think from the marketing perspective, you're always looking at it thinking, how can we create this into a really fun, exciting, beautiful campaign? And where are those creative touch points that we can kind of pull out, whether that's partnerships, whether it's a really intriguing character that you can really get under the skin of as part of the creative. So I think we do approach it as readers, but also where the sales potential is and comparing it to kind of what's already been out there, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and where the trends are. I think all of us are always very much looking at what's working, what isn't working, and where this book can kind of sit really comfortably within that space, and we can kind of feel confident we can really do it justice.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think the other thing that maybe where the PR side comes in more is also thinking about the author. Because obviously for us, working with the author, whether that's events, whether that's pitching at interviews, whether it's podcasts, who the author is, why they want to tell this story, do they have a related background to it, all of those pieces of if we're going to go and talk to an interviewer and we've got 30 seconds, which is often more than we get, to tell somebody why they should pay attention to this author and this book, having the author is a really integral piece of that puzzle alongside the hook and the pitch of the book as well. So really thinking about, is the author an experienced person who's done speaking on stage before, or have they been and done open mic nights, or have, little things like that? Have they got a family connection to this story? Little things like that that can add a little touch to that pitch really helps in terms of us seeing how we make it stand out from everything else that's out there as well. Yeah,
and I think to add to that as well, because I think it is a lot about the author, and then sometimes the answer to that question is no, they haven't done any of that, but we all really love this. And so there has to be something else then. And something that I find myself talking about a lot, a kind of acquisition stage, particularly with fiction, is there something kind of PRable in the content that we can create something? Because with the best will in the world, a lot of publicity for fiction is reviews, and those are really hard to get, those kind of broadsheet women's mag reviews. There's a lot of fiction out there every year, so you're competing a lot with yourself aside from anything else, and we're all competing with each other at the same time. So if there's something, so for example, something came through acquisitions for us, which we got, which was a few months ago, so publishing kind of 2027, and at its heart was about female friendship. And so there's something there because of the way it was written and because of the themes it tapped into that feels like, actually, here's a brilliant writer that could write op-eds, they could write essays for different publications, and that's another avenue for us that's not just straight reviews or events or that the author kind of has that experience already. So that's really helpful for us when there is something else that we can go, there's a nugget, that's a campaign in itself, because it can be challenging. So that definitely, anything that kind of feels like it makes our job a little bit easier is winning, because then it's an easier sell for everyone.
I think that's something to keep in mind as well, really, even if you're still looking for a literary agent, or like those are things you can think about, what makes your book unique or relevant, and it's not that you should be writing to trends, but it's that you should be thinking about how will a publisher be able to talk about my book? How will a publicist be able to sell my book or pitch it? How do you usually approach campaign planning with a debut author? So you've got a brand new author who doesn't know anything about the process. How does that usually work in terms of how early do you start? What does that look like?
I think it really depends. There's some things that we'll buy and we'll publish 2.5 years later. There's some things we'll buy and we'll publish 9 months later. So there is a real variety in terms of the timeline, and there's many things that could affect that. So I think it's really on a case-by-case basis. I think what we're always focusing on is, obviously, every book could have a huge range of different people who might be interested in reading it, but for most books, it's probably a core audience, a core reader that we decide between us. So I worked on a book to start this year called Hero by an amazing author called Katie Buckley, and that's very much about kind of being a woman coming of age kind of in the early 2000s. So it's very much aimed at that kind of 20 to 40-year-old female audience, probably. That's really the experience it's tapping into and who she wanted to reach with the book. So the initial thing we're looking at is, who is that audience, and then how do we get to them? So whether that's who do we work with for partnerships for marketing, or which newspapers are they reading, which digital outlets are they reading, which podcasts are they listening to, it always starts with that question of where is the core reader for this book, and then how do we make sure the book is in front of them. That's from whenever we're planning, and everything worked backwards from that. So as Megan said, some of that might be the women's magazines who sort of, they're working 4 or 5 months ahead on their planning sometimes, and that will kind of dictate when we start our campaign. Some of it might be much shorter, and it's things that, you know, they're working only a month ahead. And that means that in terms of when we're thinking about when we approach media, who we're talking to, how we're talking about it, that's all fed in from that core, who do we want to reach with this book?
I think we also love to be collaborative with you as authors. You are the people who know your work best. And so just hearing directly from you why you wrote it, you know, what your inspiration was, everything like that really helps feed into the campaign. And I also think as debut authors, it's quite easy for us as the campaign team to kind of plough on and get on with the job. But actually, if we're not telling you the process all the way through, it's totally fine to say, can I just stop you there? And can you just talk me through like the different phases that this campaign's going to go through? That's completely what we would hope you would ask. And I think different divisions do it differently, but quite a lot of divisions have an author questionnaire. When we acquire you as a new author, you'll be given a questionnaire to fill in that kind of help us as the campaign team understand, you know, your, I don't know, inspiration or your social channels or people you have connections with that might be helpful. And we'll often just sit down with you as a campaign team and kind of talk you through the process so that you're, you know, part of the team with us. You know, it's very much a collaborative process. So,
yeah, and that's also when you loop in us at the Women's Prize and say, I'm a Discoveries author and here is some support the Women's Prize can offer, because we definitely want to support you all. So in terms of actually following on from that, Sarah, what are some things that an author can do that are particularly helpful for you? So filling in that questionnaire, talking about their inspirations, but is there anything else that you as a publisher or a publicist kind of expect from an author in terms of their social media presence or their, I don't know, their other ideas or things they can be doing themselves? Or is that kind of case by case collaborative?
I think it can be case by case. I think there's sometimes a lot of pressure. I think authors feel, you tell me, but I think authors sometimes feel under pressure that you need to be on all these different social media channels. I don't actually think that's true. We have a lot of authors who don't have any social media presence whatsoever. It just helps make it a bit easier on launch if you've already got a bit of a following or a platform where you love chatting to people about your work as a starting point. And the rest is something that we can help with our own social channels and connections with retailers to kind of help bring your work to life. I think sometimes if you do have social channels, we quite often give tips and tricks on what type of content to be creating or, you know, what you can do easily that don't involve designed up social assets or anything like that, but how you can kind of just create a more genuine voice on your channels that really comes from you and your personality. So we can also give tips on that as well as a helping start.
I think you've touched on something there as well, which is so important, which is about the retailers. So obviously what we're all talking about is our ultimate consumer, our customer. But first we have to win over the initial customer, which is booksellers and, you know, Amazon, supermarkets, everyone we want to sell your book to make it the huge success that everyone wants it to be. That's why we've chosen to acquire it. So part of that is winning those retailers over. And again, it's about cutting through the noise because, you know, they're particularly booksellers. They're so hardworking. They're being pulled in so many different directions. They've got thousands of books on their shelves. So to try and cut through, what can be hugely helpful is the author being really on side with that. And sometimes that really is as simple as speaking to your local booksellers and letting them know you are a local author and you'd love to pop in and do a debut evening if they do them, or come and just sign some stock. And these can feel like really small things, but it sticks and it can really help. And some of our biggest fiction successes have been totally led by bricks and mortar stores. And that's huge. Then you've got it. Like if Waterstones are behind you and they put your book out front of store again and again and again, you're onto a massively winning streak. and we know Amazon will, mirror that, and if it's doing well for them, they'll order the appropriate amount. But the booksellers are such an important piece of the puzzle. And we always talk about them as well as, they're kind of industry influencers. They all know each other. A lot of the bookshop owners, you've got the kind of Seven Oaks, we all know who we're talking about when we name kind of Village Books and Seven Oaks and Chorleywood Bookshop and all these amazing indies, because they are absolute champions for authors and they can really make or break them. And so we never underestimate that, I think is fair to say. And so I suppose the short answer to that is, like, get out there and be up for doing those things and be up for going to sometimes quite small events and, being the kind of debut author that they're launching that week. It can be really impactful, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think that kind of stemming off that idea of kind of trying to have a bit of a network is really helpful. And obviously you guys are in a great position here because you've sort of already got 70 people in your network, and obviously through the Women's Prize Trust, and that makes a really big difference, I think. So, there are lots of highs and lows in the publishing process. So actually, if you've got somebody you can talk to who's in a similar position to you, that always will help you. But it also means if we're looking for authors to do paired events with, if you've got another author in your local area that is also publishing at the same time and you've already got a connection, that's always really helpful. I'm not saying you have to go out there and go to every literature festival, but where you have got those networks and those connections, that's really helpful. And I think the last thing I'd say is what's really helpful is when authors flag if they feel like they need support with something. So we know writing is you typically sit in a coffee shop or in your back bedroom and you work away on a book by yourself, sometimes for like decades, and then you get to publication and all of a sudden we rock up and we're like, right, go and talk to everybody. And that's totally different, right? They're two completely different sides of the same career, and sort of in nowadays you sort of have to do both to a degree, and we get that not everybody is equally suited to both of those things. So if you are feeling uncomfortable about how do I go and talk in a bookshop before in front of an audience, or if somebody asks me a question in an interview I don't like, what do I do about it, just talk to us about it. We're not expecting you to be perfect, and I think flagging where it would be helpful to have some support from whoever it is within the team, we're always happy to have that, but we kind of need you guys to tell us what we can help with.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think if you're thinking about your kind of relationships with the people in the process as you're going through, your agent is your kind of first champion, and then your editor. And then I'd say your publicist, the person who might end up on the road with you at all those events, who's going to all those independent bookshops with you, or is on the other end of the phone when you're about to do an interview and you're having those last minute panics. Your publicist is that person to kind of handhold as needed. So do ask questions if you're not sure, because they may assume knowledge just because you haven't asked, and it's always helpful just to keep that open dialogue, and make sure you check in and flag if you're concerned about something. Could you each tell me or us about a debut campaign you have been particularly proud of and what that looked like?
Shall I go? I'm particularly proud of my team, who have just delivered a campaign for a book called The Artist by Lucy Steeds. She
Women's Prize.
And she's just won the debut Waterstones Prize this year. She's just been shortlisted for Book of the Year by Waterstones as well. And that's just, it's a gem of a debut campaign, but it's also a gem of a book and a gem of an author. And I think what's made that campaign particularly enjoyable and amazing to work on is that Lucy, as an author, is so collaborative with the campaign team. She was from the very beginning, and she was doing exactly what we've just been talking about in terms of getting out there, going and visiting booksellers, chatting to them in person, really building up her network. And the other thing was she really honed her pitch. So whenever she did go and meet those booksellers in person or go out for PR, it was very much a well-honed way of talking about her work, so that it made you know exactly what you were going to get from the book, but also really made you want to pick it up and read it. And that's just been a really great campaign to see her grow as an author, but also the success that we've managed to help get with it. So, yeah.
And it's a brilliant book.
It's a beautiful book, so if you haven't read it, I highly recommend. It's great.
Joe? Or Meg?
Yeah, so I'm going to come back to the book I mentioned earlier on called Hero, which we published in January. And why this stood out to me is because I just really loved this book. And I think actually when you get a publicist or somebody, the team around it quite often we have fights behind the scenes as to who gets to work on which books because they love it so much, and this is one of those, and I'm one, thank you. And actually, so that was something that I was really passionate about from the start. The editor, the marketer, we really got what this book was trying to do, and it's a bit Marmite. Some people won't like it, some people will, but having that team around us that really did get it and wanted to push it really helps. And I think, coming back to what Sarah said, that collaboration is really important. So this book is sort of got auto-fictional elements about part of the author's own experiences that she's put in about her own relationships, and actually having that conversation really early on to say, how do we want to talk about this? You know, there's a lot of stuff that goes on with this character in the book that people are going to want to know, has that happened to you? How do you want to approach that? And actually having a really transparent and upfront conversation so that when we're talking to interviews and we're talking to events, we can say, actually, can we avoid talking about that topic for this reason? Because, you know, we want to make sure the author feels supported and protected in that. And so that really informed how we did the whole campaign and what we focused on. And she did a PhD on autofiction, which sounds very hard work, I have to say. But actually having that kind of balance of her writing autofiction and that kind of almost like professional expertise behind it meant she had a really interesting perspective. And actually it was through the conversations we had about the book that came out. So it felt like we really formed the messaging as a team between us, which was a really good way of doing it. And I think the other part that really sung with this was working out what the author was particularly passionate about. So she wasn't hugely interested in writing, you know, personal pieces about how her own life inspired the book. That sort of wasn't what she wanted to do. She wanted the reader to be able to feel like they could see themselves in it. But what she loved was events and readings. And I have to say, I went to one of her readings she did, and it was amazing. She's just one of these people who just came alive on stage, and all of a sudden, as a team, we all knew, right, this is a really core part of our campaign now, because in that setting, in that space, this author is amazing. And so we originally had planned we'd do, you know, 1 or 2 events with bookshops we knew were great, but actually after having had 1 or 2 that went really well, you know, we rolled out more and more and more, and we really lent into what was working really well. And I think that's something we all try and do now, is be quite reactive to what is getting picked up, what isn't getting picked up, what is selling the book. At the end of the day, we all want to sell the book. So if you're getting reviews and you're not necessarily seeing a ton of traction off the back of that, but you're doing events and you're seeing tons off that, you know to pivot and focus. And so that was one of those campaigns that really built for us and worked with the author to really frame how it worked for her and her book.
The one that springs to mind for me is we published earlier this year in March a book called Who Wants to Live Forever by an amazing debut author called Hannah Thomas Uose. And the book itself was really remarkable and kind of, like both Sarah and Jo are saying, just really captured the attention of everyone internally. And it was a bit of an epic. It was a big chunky read, and it was a love story ultimately, and a kind of breakdown of relationship, and then kind of how that transpired. But the storyline was following this introduction of this drug called Arratoon, which was, it was a little bit dystopian as well, but unfortunately very, very believable because of the world we're in now. And this drug was ultimately to help you live longer. So the whole thing was, you know, do you want to live forever? And the fascinating thing about it was that at the heart of it was this couple who had opposing views about this drug. So what do? You know, do you live forever without this other person? And it became that became the thread of the whole book. So it really captured the attention of all of us, which meant that it was really easy for us and the sales team to then sell that in to retailers, because it was quite an easy one-liner, and everyone could go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's kind of believable. And everyone's talking about longevity right now, and throughout this year, it's kind of become even more and more relevant with everyone talking about Ozempic and the next thing and the next thing. And so that had a real, I think what was so impressive with what the team did with that campaign was that it had this news hook as well, which they could put kind of Hannah forward for to speak about, not because she's a particular expert in that side of things, but because she was writing about it in a really accessible way. And that was a really good jumping off point for the campaign. And then for exactly the same reasons as Sarah and Jo said, really hardworking author. She did get out there and she did do events, but it was also about doing proof drops months before publication, which is literally just going into bookshops and saying, here I am, I'm the author of this, you know, with your publicist, so with that support. But it is nerve-wracking and it's not everyone's area of comfort, but I say that because it doesn't mean you have to be able to fill a room and be able to do lots of events. That is an amazing thing to do, but it's also not the only way. There are other ways to get booksellers on board. So it felt like a real sort of grassroots campaign from the beginning. And then on the marketing side, there was just really creative stuff. Like there were Uretta pill bottles being sent out with these proofs and just stuff that was really eye-catching. Who Wants to Live Forever caps that were sent out to booksellers. So at every stage, it felt like they were trying something new, and it was really cool to watch. And also to have all of the basics nailed. So it was also being sent to all the right reviewers, and it got really good coverage. And she was Radio 2 Book of the Week at the book club book when that was a thing. So there was lots of that stuff going on that was kind of the more traditional successes as well as the creative side. So it felt like that all came together really nicely.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting you hearing talk about these and how important actually that pivot can be, and kind of you obviously go into this with a campaign plan, but ultimately that can adapt and change depending on the author and the news cycle and what might be relevant or, you know, is going to make the difference in reaching that audience. So in terms of thinking about the shape of a campaign, budget obviously plays a part in that. How do you, if you're planning a campaign from the offset, how do you allocate budget? How do you think about where that needs to sit? Is that all part of this, what's best for this author in this book, and a collaborative process?
Yes. I would say, yeah, again, very much collaborative. I think it starts with sales. So it will always start with what sales, you know, feel confident that they can sell, what they think is going to resonate most with the different retailers. So it can be retailer specific as well. I think with debut writers in particular and debut launches, I think we are very reactive. So small budget doesn't mean small focus. You can have a huge campaign effort going on behind, but we can start with a small pot and it grows depending on how the book is being received, how the reviews are coming in, and we start to see that ball starting to roll. And as the, you know, that starts to build, that's when we start to review the budget. So it's never a one-shot thing. It's very much a always ongoing conversation that we're having with sales, publicity, agent, authors, all the time, basically.
Yeah, it can be a bit chicken and egg as well, because you need to kind of see how it lands. Sales need to see what the campaign is looking like so that they can go out to retailers and say, this is a huge campaign, we're all really excited about it. We need to see how the press respond to it, how, you know, audiences respond to it when we start putting it out there online. So there is a lot of that, a lot of, as we're all saying, kind of being nimble and being reactive, having your plan, but also being prepared to pivot on it. So it's really not an exact science. It's a really awkward question that we all don't like answering anything around budget, because it is so variable, and there is no, you know, even between us we would have different answers if we got into anything about exact amounts, because it just totally depends. And there are really clear parameters that need to be covered off by sales and by, you know, kind of sales ops. So like, how much are we printing? How much are we, you know, all of that stuff comes first. And it's worth saying that a lot of times when we're at you know, we were looking at how much to print and how much we predict this might sell. Sometimes we're looking at that over more than 1 year. Sometimes we're looking at it as we hope to sell X amount in hardback. In paperback, we hope to sell X amount. So there's such a huge amount going on behind the scenes before we even get to the point of what's the marketing and publicity budget for this title. So yeah, there are so many things at play, and that really can move, can't it, depending on how it's going. And also, is this author in the country? Are they going to be doing events, or actually is all our spend going on marketing? It can be really varied.
And I think and this is where my inner nerd comes out a little bit, is I think we're in a lucky position now where we get quite a lot of data, whether that's feedback from retailers, whether that's, you know, we can do things like you can try 3 different copy lines on a Facebook advert and see which one gets the best response and then shift it towards focusing on that. Or we can try and do, you know, one literature festival, one bookshop event and see what sells the most tickets, and then we know where to focus going forward. We get a lot of information that comes back to us, social media comments, Goodreads reviews, that we can then use to then re-inform the campaign. So I know we're all getting, I think, more and more driven, and there's more data than ever that we get access to, that means we can really use a lot of kind of live feedback on that front as well.
And I think it's, again, going back to that collaboration between marketing and publicity. It's how we're going to reach that target audience And sometimes the answer is it's more leaning towards the PR, which means the budget in the marketing pot doesn't need to be a huge budget. We're still going to reach those readers in a really effective way. And sometimes it leans more heavily on marketing. So I think it's that back and forth as well, which is good.
Great. Okay, over to you guys. Does anyone have any questions? We've got a roving mic. If you don't, I have more. I think there's a hand at the back. Lily's coming to you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your, sorry, you can't see me, so I'll stand. Thank you for talking to us about this. I wanted to ask what happens in a scenario where you have, for example, like a war breakout and it affects the book that you are pushing at that time. Like, how do you respond to those kind of external factors?
Well, I think the first thing we'd always want to do is kind of talk to the author, because at the end of the day, it's the author's book, and anything that we do PR-wise around it is going to come back to the author. So, an author might feel really passionately about wanting to speak out about this global event that's happened, or they might go, actually, I don't want to go anywhere near that. My book stands separately. I don't want to wade into that discussion. So we're well set up to do whichever way. If the author decides, actually, I'm really passionate, I want to go out and start talking about this, great, we can pivot and focus on that. But it really all comes from the author. I think we can all agree none of us would ever be like, ooh, this really terrible tragedy has happened that ties to your books and now you have to go and talk about that. The author wants to, great, but the first piece is always making sure the author's comfortable with whatever. And it might completely change the context of how the book is read as well, and that might change how we advertise it on social media. That, there's loads of different things that could be affected, which is why it's helpful that we're all quite hands-on all the time, but making sure the author's comfortable with whatever usage of what's going on in the news, that's the top priority.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question that unfortunately does come up, and there are also big decisions that sometimes need to be made, which is where everyone in the room is kind of being very honest about what the right, what they feel the right thing is, including the author and the agent. And sometimes that is a thing about are these too closely aligned? What the book is writing about, and actually it's not an appropriate time to publish it. That's a very real question as well. I think we also do have to be very careful to not make that jump for everyone else. That if we're feeling sensitive about something, that we're then not making a statement by making a big decision or by not putting an author out there, and then you're somehow sort of aligning with one or the other, if that makes any sense. So it's not making any big, very quick decisions, really, and having that conversation very openly. And then if it does get to the point, as Jo says, where it is a book that may touch on topics that is inevitably going to be asked about in an interview, it's all, making sure all the support is there. We often do media training out of house and intern, is that something that is required? So it is so specific to what that situation is and how directly the book ties to it. Sometimes we've just had situations where, we've in recent history had a pandemic where it wasn't right to publish some of the books we were publishing, and vice versa. Sometimes it was exactly right to publish them, and we were offering something that could be a bit of escapism or could be really helpful. So that was a really good example of what is right to do, and no one really has, the exact answer. So it has to be a discussion, and everyone has to agree that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Thank you. Any more questions? We've got some down the front. Lily, thank you. I'll go to Anna here first. Thanks.
Hi. So I think you kind of touched a little bit on maybe like authors and social media and things. I'm just wondering, for a lot of us here that aren't published yet and are maybe kind of working on our debuts, what's something that we could do now to kind of have really good foundations moving forward to then start working with you when that kind of time came?
Well, I think it always stems from what you are happy to do, because I think, as I was saying earlier, I don't ever want authors to feel pressured to have to set up a social media profile just for the sake of doing it, and then it slightly dies a death because your heart's not in it in terms of like keeping that going, because it is a lot of work to kind of keep a platform like that active and live. But I would say, if you are someone who really wants to get to know your readers or like the book community out there, looking at Instagram or looking at TikTok or whichever platform is more your kind of thing, could be Facebook, it's setting up a profile and connecting with those kind of bookstagrammers or other authors who are out there and slowly building your network up that way. I think also there's no harm if you were to set up something where you are celebrating your writing process and the different people you're meeting or bookshops you've been to that you've loved, like anything that just kind of helps you kind of present who you are and where your writing comes from, or amazing places you might have travelled to that have inspired your writing, anything like that, that helps us as a campaign team when we first kind of start working with you, is seeing that that is there as a really great starting point. I think there's never any harm in that. Yeah.
Great. Where was the other hand? Sorry, there was another one on the left here. Thank you.
My question is around how campaigns differ if on the book genre, if it's more commercial or book club fiction versus literary. Is there a typical way that they tend to differ?
Yes, definitely. So if something, for example, is very, very literary, that will definitely look completely different to, and maybe it's a bit out there, it's a bit, it's playing with genre or it's playing with format, that will look very different to like commercial women's fiction or, quote unquote, if we would put it in that kind of genre pigeonhole. And really that's about who is going to get behind it and who's going to help us with the campaign. So for something very literary, in order for that to work, you really need, the TLS or The Guardian to be saying, this is the best thing I've read all year. That when it comes down to it, that is what we as publicists are looking for. We need it to be backed by those sorts of publications. And similarly, we need Waterstones to be considering it for their prize, or, there's a lot of those sorts of conversations. For something much more commercial, that's when there is a little bit more scope, I suppose, when it comes to publicity on the more commercial side, because there is more you can do with it. There's more room for kind of interviews and sort of op-eds, like I was saying earlier, where there's something that feels a bit more like it could be a feature in a magazine. That's kind of specifically on the publicity side, but just generally, yes, they do take very different shape because you're trying to reach totally different audiences. And I mean, I guess on the digital side, it's the same, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. It's thinking about where your readership is, where you're going to best reach them. I think it's anything from retailers differ between the two literary or commercial sides. It's also, I manage an art department who design all the book covers, and even the way we're talking about that from a design perspective and how your book's actually going to look and where it's going to sit in the bookshop completely shifts. So yeah, there's kind of a whole load of stuff there. And again, it's kind of a lot based on data and what's worked before and things like that we have to look at as well.
Yeah, we're coming on to sales, rights and design next. So that's a good one to put a pin in for the next one. There was another hand that I saw on the right somewhere. Yes, thank you.
Hello, hi. Have you ever had to work with an author who might have been particularly concerned with sort of privacy or anonymity, who perhaps writes under a pseudonym or just isn't comfortable sort of having their personal details out there in any way, shape or form, for no other reason than personal preference? And if so, what kind of barriers does that present and how can they be overcome?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've actually had that more on the non-fiction side, and because of it being, someone sort of in the political world or just the nature of what they do, their activism work. So it can be for those reasons, or as you say, just simply preference. The barriers, I suppose, are just exactly what we're saying. It would limit the kind of someone getting out and, putting them out and about at kind of events and things like that. But as we're also saying, that isn't the only way. And you can also have some fun with that, with there being a pseudonym. There's been some very successful authors that use a pseudonym and don't do any of those things and even might still do press. There are still these things that can happen that aren't necessarily them being the face of it. What you do there, I think, is you just really draw out the story, and it's all about the content and not about the author behind it, because there isn't that story there. I think.
Yeah, and I think you probably spend a bit more time finding people to be your champions instead. So whether that's reviewers, and something we've not actually touched on too much is things like influencers or TikTok, actually where there are authors who don't feel confident on social, they don't want to put themselves out there. You know, you may have some authors who've sadly passed away, you may have authors who's, you know, actually you find people to talk about the book for you instead of the author, and actually that's particularly a lot of where the marketing and PR crossover is how we work with influencers, how we work with people online, find the people who we know are going to really love and champion a book for us. That is often a really important piece of that puzzle, and again, it's just finding out how do you get those people on board in the first place? What is it about this book, not necessarily anything to do with the author, that really stands out, and then how do you make that work as hard as possible in lieu of having an author do it?
So at the moment we're working with a former spy whose identity must remain anonymous, which is a great hook. He has written a spy novel, but in terms of him being able to be out and about, and he has to remain completely anonymous. So he writes under a pseudonym and he gives us voice notes. So we are able to create some really cool content just through him and his voice, and it adds to that mystery to it. So just as a marketing tool for us, we're like, this is great. It doesn't matter that he's not going to be visible or able to go to things. We can make something of that and make it exciting. So
I think it's also worth saying that pen names are quite common, and like lots of people just don't use their legal name and write under a different name, and that's perfectly fine. You can have your author persona, and that be a separate thing. So amazing.
I was going to say, actually, I would say most authors probably have an author persona. I actually think very few people who are authors, when they're doing events, when they're doing interviews, that's not really what many authors are actually like in their day-to-day life with their family and friends. Like, I think it's quite a natural thing for people to have that slight shift in, I'm in work mode now, I need to focus like this. In fact, we probably all do it at work as well. It's the exact same thing. I think that's a very normal thing for authors to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing. Thank you all so much. This was brilliant. And we are moving on to Wright's sales and design next. So thank you.